In this presentation, I shall be taking you along on my photography tour with Colin Prior in Ardnamurchan on the west coast of Scotland. Day 1, Glen Nevis. On this day, we took the short drive from the hotel to Glen Nevis, and after we parked the van, I saw the river flowing down through the rocks. I decided to get down by the river to get as low as possible, framing up the river as it zigzags down through the gorge effect of the rocks, leading back to the autumn colours of the tree at the head of the falls. As I continued my hike up the valley, I stopped to create this image, as it symbolises how I wanted to recall this location with the silver birch tree and the Scots pine in close proximity, the boulder in the right of the frame and the trees full of autumn colours with the moody conditions covering the hills. I was drawn to the silver birch tree and the Scots pine with the contrast in trunks. As I moved directly in front of them at distance and used my telephoto lens to compress the scene, it made me think it looked like they were about to start a ballroom dance. I loved the ridge behind me and I kept an eye on it, hoping for some light to catch it. As time passed I could see no chance, but some low clouds appeared and I liked how they lightly flanked the hills and the ridge. Day 2, Stran. On our second day we were heading deep into Ardnamurchan to Stran to an ancient oak woodland. I created the following images after looking around the woodland for some time for something more intimate to represent the woodland. As we walked back along the path towards the car park, I noticed a group of conifers higher up on the opposite side of the valley, with the sun lighting up a small section, bringing up the luminance of the greens and the yellows. Further along the path, I had seen these oak trees earlier, and I stopped to photograph the 3 oak trees with Sgwr Dwnnel in the background. I then reframed up the 2 oak trees to the right, with the mountains behind them and a row of conifers on its slope. I had also seen a lovely oak tree just off the pathway earlier, and had it in mind to photograph it on the way back, zooming in to the main elements of the trunks to create an intimate view of it to complement the images I created earlier in the woodland. As we made our way back along the road from the oak woodlands, we drove through some spectacular scenery of the Marvin Peninsula. Colin was looking for a suitable spot to park, and we eventually parked up and all set off looking for compositions. I saw a group of silver birch trees on the hillside opposite us, so I set off down the hill, over the river, and up the hillside towards them. After some time I settled for this composition, placing them in a diagonal in the foreground with the hills in the background and the trees full of autumn colours. I then used my telephoto lens to zoom in on the branches as they appear to interlock with a splash of orange hues. On my way back down the hillside, I saw this lovely arrangement of trees full of character, with the lovely hues of yellow, green and oranges of autumn. This was my favourite image at this location. Day 3, Rosin, Glen Nevis and Castle Torm. Colin gave us 2 options at the start of the day to either head to the Ardnamurchan point or to Rosin, another headland, but with more to offer in the way of views and autumn colours. Also, it wasn't so far to drive, and we all opted for Rosin. Once we arrived, and after a short hike, we reached a vantage point where we got some amazing views out over Loch Ardnamurchan towards the Isle of Egg and Isle of Rum on the horizon. As we drove back along the road heading towards Glen Nevis, we stopped in a lay-by to allow me to create this image looking over to the headland and the mountains beyond. We set off on the way to Castle Torm. we saw so much potential on this road, and once again we found a lovely small bay, and after some time I found this tree lungwort. I loved how it looked like a seahorse glittered with tiny pearls. Arriving at Glen Nevis, we stopped at a bay, and it was a lovely location. I then made my way around the headland to use the light that I saw further up the glen, and I created 2 images. The first image, I used the rocks full of textures and patterns in the foreground, and the second with the birch tree in the foreground. After a shortest drive, we finally reached Castle Torm, and luckily some nice light brought out the vibrance of the autumn colours. As I walked along the beach, I could see this group of trees high up on a rocky crag full of autumn colours, and to me it looked like they were marching down a slope. Back at the hotel a bit later on, I sat down with a cup of coffee, and I looked out my window by the veranda, and I could see this amazing light over the loch with the hills in the distance. Out came my camera to get this wonderful room with a view image. Day 4. Glen Nevis and Sutherlands Grove. On day 4, we took the route up to Glen Nevis, but unfortunately we couldn't see the iconic mountain range due to rain and low clouds. However, upon arriving in Glen Nevis, we had a brief period when the cloud lifted. This was the single image that I got looking down the Glen Nevis valley when the brief opportunity allowed me to create this image. At this point, Colin suggested another woodland he knew called Sutherlands Grove, and we soon set off after to see if the conditions would be better there. When we arrived at Sutherlands Grove, we had a nice canopy in the trees for shelter, and the rain had subsided slightly. After a brief walk from the car park, I was treated to this beautiful autumnal view, with the leaves in the water and the light coming in. It was amazing. So I set off treading through the river to create this image. A short hike up following the river, I soon saw this fern on a mossy tree's branch being lit up beautifully by the sunlight penetrating through the tree's canopy. As I made my way back down towards the car park, I saw this small waterfall with dark boulders in contrast to the luminance of the autumn leaves, making for a lovely composition. Day 5. Castle Stalker. On this, our last day, we were heading to Castle Stalker, and prior to setting off, I liked the moody conditions looking down Loch Linnhe, and I created this image. Upon arrival at the castle, we had some flat light, and at this point I decided I would create images in black and white. With the low tide, I set off and found a position where I could take these 2 images. This 5-day tour with Colin was an amazing experience for me, and I will most certainly look to consider going on a future tour with him.